Thank you, everybody, for joining this virtual meeting. I want to welcome you all, and we'll try to keep this and keep it as short and meaningful as we can. So right now on the agenda, we're going to take the invocation by Ms. Fumi Daramola.
Oh Lord, we thank you for another day in your presence. We thank you for bringing us all together. We thank you for all the deliberations that we are going to make today. We thank you for all the teachings that we're going to put out there today. We thank you for the heart that we have in our hearts, because in everything we have to just give thanks. We thank you for life. For God bringing us all together, it's a privilege. We thank you. So as we take on today's webinar and learn from one another, answer questions that are unanswered, and we have a lot of questions that will be left ahead. We want everyone on this forum today to take home one thing or the other. In your name we pray.
Thank you, Fumi. Very short and straight to the point. So we'll take the welcome from the board chair of ECHO's Africa Initiatives, the organizers of this virtual conference, Meg Obareke.
Hi, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this virtual town hall. Today we'll be trying to unmask the numerous faces of systemic racism in our midst and talk about a healing process, going forward. We are really thrilled that you took out time from your busy schedules and your self-care day to join us and for us to deliberate. So thank you for stepping out and stepping up and bringing your voice with you, because this discussion about racism is something that affects each and every one of us. It's a global thing. So it's a pleasure that you are able to join us so we can all gather together and speak up and speak against what is going on against people of color. This year particularly, everybody has been going through a lot of stress. We know that the COVID-19 hit, and with it, we realized that the people of color were shortchanged in the whole thing, because when we look at our medical system, we realized that we were not getting the same kind of help that other people were getting. And when we're talking about systemic racism, we are talking about, if you go to our schools, we have less than other people. If we go to the hospitals, it's the same thing. If you go to the job places, you are not hired or employed. And even when you are employed, you're treated differently because of how you look and how you sound. And this is something that we need to talk about. It's high time. It's not as if this is the first time we are having police brutality come up in the forefront, where we've seen our men and our children being killed because of their color. But it's the time where it has really touched us because of what we are going through. So thank you very much for coming out, for us to join voices together and talk about this. And I hope it will be a productive and rewarding deliberation that we'll have together. I want to especially thank the speakers. I want to thank Dr. Ron Daniels, Electra Wellstein for coming. I thank you, Christelle Onwe and Jean Adams for joining us, so that we can highlight something that has been pushed under the rug. And it's high time that people talked about it and not feel like, oh, the Blacks are making a big deal over nothing, because it is something. It is big, and it's something we need to talk about right now, because it's affecting us all. Human lives matter. It doesn't matter whether you're Black or you're white. Human lives count, and that's what we want. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
So I'm going to give a brief synopsis of ECHO's Africa Initiative. ECHO's Africa Initiative is a 501c3 non-for-profit organization dedicated to improve the lives of women, girls of African descent by championing their causes, equipping them with necessary information, educating, empowering with which they can navigate their present situation. We research challenges that adversely impact vulnerable populations' ability to live equal lives. We advocate for them to relevant stakeholders and the public. We design and undertake projects targeted to enlighten and keep them informed while intervening by creating opportunities for empowerment through which they can successfully address their situation. Our mission is to work with people of African descent in New York and Africa to end social injustice. We envision a world of equality where Black women and children are not left behind. We value social impact, building a community, driving change, good stewardship, and excellence. For more information or to donate to the cause, please check us out at echoesafricainitiative.org. Follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Felicia. I'm just going to give a brief introduction of our board members. We have here our board chair, Meg Ubarieke, who just gave the welcome address. We have Kelechi Oguru. Are they here? Can you spotlight them? Kelechi Oguru, the vice chair. We have Felicia Mbada that you're just seeing, our board secretary. We have Fumi Daramola, who gave the invocation, is the assistant board secretary. Mary Uma, the treasurer. Victor Ezinwa, Beatrice, and all our volunteers who have signed in here today. We say thank you and well done. Etlin Metzger, one of our board members, you're seeing her on screen. They have been working tirelessly to put all this together. And my humble self, the founder and president of the organization, we are very grateful for all of you making time in this our new reality to join us in this much needed discussion. Thank you all for being part of it, and thank you board members for all that you do to change lives, to touch lives. Thank you. So right now we are going to do the introduction of the speakers. Felicia. Hello, Felicia.
Yes, give me 1 second, I'm sharing.
Okay.
Okay. So Electra Weston from Harlem, New York, developed her music, theater, and dance training into a vibrant career in Europe, Africa, and the United States. Weston toured as a singer and dancer in Dibolo Dibala from the Republic of Congo, recording the hits All Right and Music and the Rhythm for Sony and the East West Warner Music France. She also appeared as Mother in Jonathan Demme's film The Truth About Charlie and in the German and US tour production of Disney's musical The Lion King. Most notably, Weston was the director and producer of her international award-winning film Maybe Dreams Can Come True. As the founder of the International Children's Program, ICP, Electra Weston utilizes her background to support youth and their communities, demonstrating how the arts empower our society, culture, and economy. ICP is the U.S. Department of State and the IREX 2018 Mandela Washington Foundation Reciprocal Exchange recipient, and a 5-time Carnegie Hall Neon Art grantee.
Okay, the next speaker is Gene Adams. Gene Adams is a licensed social worker with decades of experience in the fight for social injustice in the country. He is the director of collaborative education at Bronx Community College. Mr. Adams has over 35 years of corporate, nonprofit, and education leadership experience, which span in the areas tempered by a strong history as a community activist, entrepreneur, youth advocate. Mr. Adams has participated in the Bronx community. Could you scroll up? Mr. Adams has participated in Bronx Community College partnerships with universities and schools in Senegal and South Africa. He has used African international education and service learning experience as a tool for empowering New York's urban youth by coordinating trips for high school and college-age students. Jean Adams has served as a consultant for many of New York's agencies, including the United Way of New York City and the New York City Department of Education. Thank you, Jean.
Crystal Onu is the director of the Social Work Unit and lead advisor for the African Diaspora Communities of the New York City Commission of Human Rights. She also serves as the agency's Equal Employment Opportunity Recruitment Strategist. She is a 2017 graduate of the Choral Immigrant Civic Leadership Program, ICLP, and serves as the adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice within the Africana Department. She is a member of the New York Civic Engagement Commission's Language Access. She earned her bachelor's degree at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a master's of science in social work policy at Columbia University School of Social Work. Crystal Onu is a proud New Yorker. Who lives in the Bronx with her family and hails from Cameroon. She is fluent in French, Pidgin, and Ikon.
Veteran social and political activist who happens to be our keynote speaker today, Dr. Ron Daniels, was an independent candidate for the President of the United States of America in 1992. He served as Executive Director of the National Rainbow Coalition in 1987 and Southern Regional Coordinator and Deputy Campaign Manager for the Jesse Jackson for President campaign in 1988. Dr. Daniels is a distinguished lecturer emeritus who taught political science at York College of the City University of New York. From 1993 to 2005, Dr. Daniels served as the first African-American executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. During his tenure, CCR emerged as a major force fighting against police brutality and misconduct, church burnings, hate crimes, voter disenfranchisement, environmental racism, and the threats to civil liberties posed by government's response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack. He is the host of a weekly issue-oriented public affairs talk show on WBAI 99.5 FM on the Pacifica Network and is author of Still on This Journey, The Vision and Mission of Dr. Ron Daniels. Dr. Daniels is founder and president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, IBW, a progressive, African-centered, action-oriented resource center dedicated to empowering people of African descent and marginalized communities. IBW is the convener of the influential Pan-African Unity Dialogue, which I happen to be a member of. As the administrator of the National African American Reparation Commission, IBW has also emerged as a leading organization within the US and global reparation movements. NAARC has devised a 10-point reparation program and is a staunch supporter of HR 40, the congressional bill that would establish a national commission to study reparation proposals for African Americans. Dr. Ron Daniels serves as a convener of NAARC. Thank you, Dr. Daniels.
So quickly, I just want to go, before we have our keynote speaker go, I want to just lay down some ground rules. Thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate everyone who has come, and we hope that this becomes a really a place where we can talk and dialogue together and come up with solutions together. So please stay muted if you're not speaking. So if you're not one of the keynote speakers, please stay muted. We also would ask you to keep your video up so you're not getting distracted. If you have any questions, comments, or even suggestions, please go ahead and type it in the chat. Send it to everyone. We have some board members who will be monitoring the chat, so we'll be able to ask questions at the end of all the speakers. We'll have a chance to have a Q&A, and then we'll go through the chat and ask questions on the chat. So those are some ground rules that we have, and then we can move on.
Yeah, so the first speaker is our keynote speaker for the day, Dr. Ron Daniels. Dr. Daniels, you have the floor.
I'm learning this technology, so I'm glad to be among such young whizzes out here who know how to do this. This is something virtually new to me. Well, first of all, let me thank you very much, very kindly, for this opportunity to share a few words with this incredible audience of presenters and panelists. Um, First of all, I obviously want to thank Ife, president and editor of the Echoes magazine, and her staunch supporter, Victor. I think I saw Victor somewhere on the scene, for putting together this forum. And also to thank you for being a member of the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. I really like the Echoes magazine. I think it's just a fabulous, fabulous magazine. And we love the mission of the organization. And it's an honor to be asked to share a few words on this occasion, this town hall meeting at such a critical moment in history. I've heard my radio show has already been referenced, so I won't speak to that. I will say visit the website ibw21.org. Lots of information there, and my book Still on This Journey has also been referenced. Well, it's very challenging. You know, I've got a few minutes, and I'm going to try to speak really fast. So you're going to have to, because I want to hear everybody else, but I have a lot that I want to sort of jam in a few minutes. The topic is the numerous faces of racial injustice. And what I want to do is start with Malcolm X, El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz. El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X said, of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward all research. So I want to take a historical tack as we answer this question, as we look at this question. Because we can look at all the things that are happening now, all of the racial injustices and so forth, and we can catalog them, and I'm sure we will. But at the end of the day, it's important for me to say that the Ma'afa, the Holocaust of enslavement, is the most horrific racial injustice and crime against humanity in the history of the world. That we have to begin there, because in some ways, everything else flows from that proposition. So many of you already know, I'm just repeating things that you know, but we need a refresher course, because when we're in these moments, sometimes we have historical amnesia. So it was Professor Dr. Sir Eric Williams, the Prime Minister of Trinidad, who wrote the book, Capitalism and Slavery. A better book, for my taste, is How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. Why are these books important? Because they establish without a shadow of a doubt that the wealth of Europe and the Western world was built on the labor of African people. There are various estimates. The least estimates run about 10 million to 15 million. W.E. Du Bois said over the life of the transatlantic slave trade, there may have been as many as 100 million Africans who lost their lives. Shocking. It is so shocking that sometimes it sort of just bounces off of us, because we don't like to think about 100 million people. In the Belgian, in the Congo alone, some of you know, King Leopold, savagery. I mean, how could someone even call themselves civilized given the savagery of what went down in the Congo? So if we talk about racism and white supremacy, we must understand that we are not an inferior people. We know our history, as Rob Marley says, so we know that we are the givers of life and civilization. We know that all of the most important civilizers and influences flow from the loins of people of African descent, from Africa. All of humankind can trace its lineage back to an African woman that the anthropologists call Lucy. So we are, in a real sense, everybody's African, because all of the world traces its humanity to us. And of course, for many, many years, for eons, we were in the forefront of giving the world its most powerful civilizing influences. And that is before the incursion of the Europeans in terms of the Holocaust that we speak of. So they knew we are not inferior, but there was the concoction of a theory of race. There's really no such thing as race, but this was concocted as a way of rationalizing the behavior that took place. And in the rationalization of this thing called race, there was a sense of those who were superior and those who were inferior. And the notion was that those who were of Caucasians or the Caucasoids or so forth, those who were of lighter pigmentation were superior. And then it went down from the so-called the Caucasoid to the Mongoloid to the Negroid. You know, and so it's white folks and brown folks, and then it got to black folks, and at the bottom, white folks are in superior. Those who are less than white but not black or somewhere in between, and then black folks at the bottom. Here in the United States of America, our folks came up with a very simple thing. We say, hey, it's like this. If you're white, you're all right. Yellow, mellow. Brown, stick around. And black, get back. Because that is the black to white inferiority to superiority continuum. And so this virus, the real virus, the infection was infused into the systems of Western society. This virus of white supremacy that later also manifests itself in structural and institutional racism. We should also be aware of the fact that the shocks, and I don't have time to go through all the brutality and the shocks, that more and more scientists are talking about the epigenetic cross-generational trauma that we have endured and continue to endure as a people. Trauma, which really is the real underlying reason why we are more susceptible, not just poverty, not just economic disadvantage, because of our immune systems having been compromised over generations. Epigenetically, we're more susceptible to COVID-19 and other pandemics. And so a shock and a face of racism, but the faces of racial injustice don't end there. We can talk about, you know, we're being picked up by the police. We've always been picked up by the police. But colonialism, not only enslavement, colonialism is another face of racial injustice, where the pillage of Africa continued, the rape and pillage of Africa continued in terms of extracting wealth and exploiting the human beings there. And even if you were in the diaspora, Jamaica, if you were, or in the Caribbean, or Cuba, or throughout Central and South America, it was the same thing. Colonialism, extracting the wealth of Black people to build the society of Europeans. And so another face of racial injustice. In the United States of America, as I teach my students from the very beginning, it was declared to be a white man's land. It's in the history books. It was written that way, to be a white man's land. And the institution of chattel slavery, where we were reduced to less than human beings. Racial injustice, if you will. Vicious, vicious, vicious dehumanization and criminalization of Black people. So if you are in Africa or the diaspora, if we're talking about the faces of racial injustice, it all leads back to one place. And that is the Holocaust of enslavement and all of the aftermath, including the public lynching of George Floyd and the disparate impact on Black people of the COVID pandemic. So the real question is, we sort of know these things. Questions, what are we going to do about it? What must be done is the real question. And in that regard, it seems to me that reparations, the repair to damages done to human beings, both in terms of their physical destruction, cultural, mental, identity, has to be repaired. Reparations is the key to what it is that we need to do in terms of dismantling structures of white supremacy in the 21st century. And so I'm honored that we are working with the CARICOM Reparations Commission. There is a CARICOM reparations, the nations of the Caribbean are demanding reparations. In fact, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles just the other day, last Monday, I think it was, laid out a challenge to Europe that they should meet in a 3-day summit to discuss the mess that they have created. They've had the audacity to do that. Here in the United States of America, we have a 10-point program, and we are challenging this country and at various levels to deal with the question of reparations. Africa, however, is MIA, missing in action. And perhaps in the question and answer period, we can find out why. We're pushing in this country also for HR 40, the bill that would create a reparations not to study whether or not reparations are warranted, but what form it will take. And it's now received more co-sponsors than it ever at any time in history, and has an excellent opportunity to actually come into reality. As I move to conclusion quickly, as we talk about action, we need to be talking about Black power. We need to be talking about economic power, as Marcus Garvey exhorted us to do. It was Nkrumah who also taught us, and we need to, as Malcolm said, to study. Because of all of our studies, history is most qualified to reward all research. Nkrumah, the architect, the father of Pan-Africanism on the continent, said that neo-colonialism would be the last stage of imperialism. That even when we controlled countries, when we had governments and flag independence, the former colonial powers will still be strangling our economies and extracting wealth from our people. The last stage of imperialism. W.B. Du Bois said that Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth. That's important because in the end of the day, no African person, given Garvey's vision, should be suffering anywhere, because Africa should be the basis for global Black power. It was Amilcar Cabral who said, however, Amilcar Cabral, check him out, who said, but we must also learn to struggle against our own weaknesses. Dr. Betty Shabazz said, the wife of Malcolm X, said that we may be oppressed, but we do not have to cooperate with our oppressors. And so I am compelled to say that unfortunately, we are suffering both here in the United States, the Caribbean, and on the African continent with too many leaders who are self-aggrandizing leaders, whose only mission was to replace the white faces with Black faces, but to carry out, unfortunately, a similar agenda. I mean, the self-aggrandizement, the self-serving nature of it. I mean, people who are just pocketing literally billions of dollars and watching the African continent be recolonized by people from elsewhere, including the Chinese, and being complicit in that proposition. And so we've got to deal with that question. And so we have in the city, as you see in the back, something called the Pan-African Unity Dialogue, because the diaspora must play a leading role in helping to deal with these questions. So whether or not we're continental Africans, or whether we're Caribbean Americans or Afro-Latinos or African Americans so-called, we must be working together in the diaspora to create a basis for liberating ourselves. And so we've developed something called a Pan-African, Proud African Policy Agenda, which Ife is aware of, because when the Orange Man or the Agent Orange called the African countries S-holes and this kind of stuff, we said, no, we're not. We are proud Africans, and we have a policy agenda. Because at the end of the day, when we get finished with all of our complaints and so forth, it's about organizing to have power, and power to have policy. So I'm going to conclude with just a little pledge that I wrote many years ago, which is called A Pledge for African People. It goes like this. We are an African people. We are not just people of color, by the way. We are African people. We are in the habit now, even in this country, he's talking about people of color. I said, which people of color are we talking about? Are we talking about Latinos and Asians? If so, let's call them. They're Latinos and Asians. But most often we're talking about ourselves of color. No, we are not of color. We are African people. We should be proud of the fact that we are African people, all right? We must remember the humanity, glory, and sufferings of our ancestors and honor the struggle of our elders. We must strive to bring new values and new life to our people. We must have peace and harmony among us. We must be loving, sharing, and creative. We must work, study, and listen, so we must learn so we must teach. We must cultivate self-reliance. We must struggle to resurrect and unify our homeland. We're speaking now of the diaspora, particularly of African Americans. We must resurrect our homeland and unify it. We must raise many children for our nation. By that, we mean that there are no motherless children and no fatherless children based on the values of African people. One of your missions here is to talk about women and girls, right? You're saying you're going to be parents to all African girls in terms of making sure that in this patriarchal world, they find their righteous place as leaders in this world as they should be. We will have discipline, patience, devotion, and courage. We will live as models to provide new direction for our people. We will be free and self-determining because we are an African people, and together we will win. Wakanda forever.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Miss Electra Weston. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
First, I want to say thank you. So I hope you can hear me clearly. I was having some technical issues earlier. I wanted to thank the Echoes Africa Initiative for inviting me today. These are challenging times and I'm very troubled. Even deciding how to speak or what to say has been very challenging for me. I feel touched by the irony of those questioning the reality of systematic racism, where there is horrific evidence of it all around us, being recorded, captured on video. I have the privilege of working with young people. And through that privilege, I have to speak to what are the messages that we are sending to our children. It has become a cliche that children are the future, but they are the future. And what message are we leaving for our children? In this powerful moment of hashtags, where we have words are so powerful to symbolize where we're going in our future. If I had to create a hashtag, I would say our choices affect our children. Hashtag our choices affect our children. I have to briefly speak to a few incidents that touch me personally. Currently, it's worldwide now, the news of the 911 call where a woman decided to call 911 in New York City in a park to say a Black man was attacking her. More horrific than her making up this reality is that currently in the news, this young brother has decided not to press charges against her. Again, I say, what message are we sending? What messages are we sending? He states that what she's been through is too harsh. She's already been through enough. So why should I go to court? Why should I pass judgment against her? I speak to, there's so many in the press, but these are ones that touched me so deeply. In Chicago, there was a Chicago police officer who was assassinated in his own home when a random woman walks in his house and shoots him. Her excuse is that she didn't know that she thought it was her apartment and she thought there was a strange Black man in her apartment who happened to be a cop. To the end of the story, the man was assassinated in his own home. She went to court. His brother in the courtroom hugged this woman who assassinated his brother. I'm asking again, what messages are we sending? How do we love ourselves? What messages are we sending to our children who are our future about how we care about ourselves? And I do also, lastly, and just quickly, there's a comedian from SNL who makes a joke about the LGBTQ community fights for equal rights, which is their just. The Black community is fighting to matter. When you think about the irony of it, even though the passion behind the women who began the movement, and we know what it's supposed to mean, but the word matter is so weak for our people. From descendants of kings and queens, we just need to matter. Once again, what message are we sending? What are we sending to our children? Again, I think about our future. I think of what I do every day. I have the privilege to work with young people. I've had the privilege to work with young people in the United States, in Europe, in Africa, and I am inspired by the future. But we have to be careful about what path we leave for them. What is the message that because when we're gone, what we do will echo, as your initiative will echo for our children. So we have to be very careful. It's very, very dangerous. And I know the power of forgiveness. People of color are very spiritual and believe, okay, you should love your enemy and try to challenge them to do better. But do we love them to the point where they destroy us completely? How far can they go? What is the limit? So I have to just, in my privileged experience working exclusively and extensively, with young people, preschool to college, I thought about when we're talking about systematic racism, there's so many, as I said, it's all around us. And I'm just speaking of a few things that touched me. I want to speak just briefly in my own experience to what is systematically racist to our young people. I give an example of a young Asian girl, she's Chinese, and her name is Nancy. Why is her name Nancy? Because society refuses to understand or learn how to pronounce her name. So for her life, she will be Nancy. She is transported to another place that is not her home for, in quotation marks, a better life. But now, what message are we telling her that your name doesn't matter? I'm not going to try to pronounce your name. I'm going to give you an Americanized name because it's easier for me. And that's how you can progress in our world. Again, what message are we sending? A young man that we work with, he's from Burkina Faso. His language is More, but they force him to speak French because they can't communicate with him. The irony of in the United States that a young African boy is forced to speak the language of the colonialists in order to integrate and progress in the United States, what message are we sending? These are painful things that challenge me every day. And I think, we've lived through, and we can name their names, all of the assassinations that we see of our brothers and sisters. But I look at the little children who are touched by these things, and I think, what can we do better? How we have to do better. Hashtag, our choices affect our children. I talk about a young Nigerian boy whose family sent him to Germany. They sent him to Germany because they want a better life for him. But he becomes a German. He has become a German. He was separated for his entire life for a better life. But now his connection with his own African heritage is so wide that he doesn't know where he feels placed in the world. Or a young Mexican little girl whose parents just send her to the border, to the US border, because they're going, we're having such a hard time. We rather send you, just abandon you into the wind and hope and pray to God for better for you. What messages are we sending? I'm scared for our children because I think my last example for these beautiful children that I know is of a young child who is asked to change. When you there's, and I'm not going to name the country because I don't want to do generalizations because this exists everywhere. When you're allowed to integrate into, I'm going to say, a European, which is a European country, when you turn 16 years old, you can choose between your life or your parents if they are undocumented immigrants. Then this particular child, the mother, the court becomes their parent, and they send your parents back to Africa. And so this child grows up in Europe, brought up by the government because they believe that the life for this child is going to be better. And the parents leave their child because they're hoping for a better life for for their child. Again, what is the message that we're sending? Is the government is sending my child to the border or changing my child's name or having my child choose between me and another country? Is that better? Is it better? I once again, my question is hashtag, The choices we make affect our children, and what messages are we sending to our children? Systematic racism in detention centers here in the United States, which we work extensively in detention centers, where they group together Spanish-speaking young people. Now, America is a melting pot, and so a lot of what I'm talking about are people from every single part of the world, because America is every single part of the world. All of them children of the diaspora. They group that Spanish people speaking kids into one detention hall because they assume that this is better for them and they can speak together. Once again, not realizing Spanish is the language of the colonialists. Not all of the Spanish-speaking children, quote unquote Spanish-speaking children, speak the European Spanish that they're associated with. Americans have not even taken the time to understand that there are multiple languages amongst these quote unquote Spanish speaking children. They are descendants of racism. The colonialists was Spaniards, and now they're grouping them together and asking them once again, speak the language of your colonialists in this American country. I know I'm not going to bring someone to try to help you understand English since you're in America. Why not integrate you? I'd rather force you again to speak the language that I associate you with, which is associated with colonialism. So I'm just using these since we're talking about systematic racism. I think we don't think about little things that affect our children. They seem small, but they have an impact on them for the rest of their lives. And even though sometimes we think we're giving them better, we're harming them in the long run. What is their connection? How do they feel about themselves? Do they love themselves? We know how as I began with the man in the park in the 911 call, we know how these stories end. If the cop had listened to her and come and got that gentleman, he might be dead today. But yet he is willing to forgive her and hope that she does better. What are the messages that we're sending? So I think the solution, I think Americans, and I say this for our children because I love our children and I work with them, I hope that we strive to do better for ourselves. Economic empowerment, as the keynote speaker so brilliantly said, we need this economic power amongst ourselves. What I'm doing is creating opportunities to work in Africa, in Europe, and in exchange. The same thing that I send out, I get right back 100 times more. And that economic power, specifically amongst people of color, is what's going to catapult us forward. If we continue to try to strive in these societies that do not want us, we will never achieve anything. In my opinion, we have got to find a way to empower ourselves amongst ourselves. That does not mean isolate ourselves. When people say all lives matter, I'm mad at that. I'm mad at all lives matter because it's a given. The same way the comedian said, why are we striving for matter? What people of color are striving for you to understand that we deserve better. We don't need you to give us better. We're going to fight for our better. And hopefully we will economically fight for our better, if only for our children. I ask you once again, hashtag, what are the choices that we are leaving? What are the choices that we're making for our children? We just need to do better. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Electra. I appreciate your time. And the next speaker is Jean Adams. Jean, you have the floor.
Hey. How's everybody?
We're good.
Good. First, of course, I'd like to thank the managers and editors of Echoes Africa for your invitation. Then I also like to thank Dr. Daniels for his history of work and contribution and sacrifice. And of course, also like to thank Electra for the work that she's doing, and of course, Christelle. But I'm also not, I've checked this out, right? And I'm looking at the whole panel, and I'm very much impressed by the fact that the editors and board at Echoes Africa decided to put this panel together and put myself as well as the other Africans from this part of the diaspora at the center of it. because I think it's very important that we have these kind of discussions and that we learn to listen and hear how we're experiencing institutional or global racism from different parts of the world. So as some of you know, I work pretty extensively with the African community. So I know that we all don't come to the table with the same experiences in terms of how we've had to confront institutional and global racism. So I think it should go noted that the magazine and the publishers put this discussion together, which one that has a significant African-American so-called and an African continental audience. And I think that's critical because we have to have these conversations continually every day so that we can understand what's happening in our different fronts and also develop the resources and the skills to support one another. I thank Dr. Daniels again because the way he laid out the historical foundation, which brings us to where we are now. I think a lot is happening today and everyone is, all up in it with their social media and broadcast news. And I think it's great. But I think Dr. Daniels laid it down at a much deeper and a much more significant level than most people in this country, Black or any other, have tried to understand. We are pretty much caught up in the moment of this particular wave of rebellion and of protest and of the work that we do. But as Dr. Daniels put it so eloquently, this is fundamentally a continuum of hundreds of years of struggle through the trauma. But I do think it's important that we talk about what's happening now and that we link what's happening now to the historical journey and our being here. We have to read, and I think Dr. Daniels laid down a number of very good examples of writers and historians and activists that we need to read up on. We can't go out with the idea that the Black Lives Matter movement is the foundation of anything. That's not to take anything away from the work that young people are doing and the sacrifices that they are making. But I think it's, as a lecturer kind of leaned towards, our struggle is about a lot more than mattering. But again, that's not to diminish what is happening, but we have to be clear. Each generation engages and makes its own level of contribution, and we have to embrace that based upon the historical time and moment that that generation arises. What our folks did in the United States specifically throughout the slave period, the sacrifices that they made inched us further and further along our way to the point of the Civil War, where African-American men and women fought bravely for the liberation of Black people in this country. Every generation puts its shoulder forward and contributes its resources and technologies and makes its mistakes to confront this trauma. This current generation is unique in that they have a unique set of resources that the previous generation may not have had. Imagine if Malcolm had Twitter or Facebook or these tools that young people are using. It's their time now, and it's up for us to support them while at the same time coach them and give them a deeper sense of resonance and understanding in terms of what this struggle is about. So we don't get caught in the wave of this is simply about the police and simply about the police killing Black people. Because as one of the young ladies spoke earlier, if we were to do a body count, sadly, of the numbers of folks that we lost through the COVID-19 epidemic between the end of February and now, we've lost 30,000 African people in the United States. That's not to diminish the losses of Native Americans and Latinos and other folks, but we know specifically 30,000 Africans have lost their lives. So we cannot dislodge what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement at the police resistance level with what's going on in any of the other areas of institutional racism and the trauma that those forms of racism are placing on African people. So though we have to continue to fight around and push the issues relating to the police violence and police terrorism, we cannot for a minute not understand clearly that police terrorism relates to health, relates to education, relates to housing, relates to banking, relates to employment. They're all part of the same fundamental system, and the police is simply one of many arms. So I think it's critical that for this generation who are enthusiastically engaged in this particular moment of struggle, that we give them and make sure that they have the information that they need so that they can make good judgments and see the larger picture. As Dr. Daniels stated, at some point soon, the issue of reparations has to remain at the center of the table. You know, the work around the police and the folks who are out there and at the forefront of it is more than important, but we cannot allow that to simply become the movement. As I said, every generation builds on the work that came before it. But again, if we're going to attack institutional racism, you know, long before what happened to Mr. Floyd, we could attack the New York City Board of Education for having the most segregated school system in the United States. And we look at the results that happen or come out of the New York City Board of Education and what that means for the health and well-being of Black people and African people. And then we have to, again, bring in our own scholars, learn from those who came before us about the historical aspects, but also about the social, psycho-emotional aspects. You know, we have to read authors such as Dr. Amos Wilson, who basically said that if you want to understand any problem in America, you need to focus on who profits from that problem, not just who suffers from the problem. The reason things are the way they are is not by accident. So we have to bring that to the forefront of our understanding. What we're contending with was not something that was just slipped off the table. It's part of a global historical point of view and perspective. So we have to bring our own researchers, educators forward so that we can look at their work. You know, Dr. Julian and Julia and Nathan here and the work that they've done about systemic traumatic experiences of African people. In Harlem, we had Dr. John Bowling for a number of years, and of course, Dr. Kenneth Clark. So my point is that if we're going to have these kind of discussions specifically about healing, one, we have to start off right where Dr. Daniels insists, that we have the historical perspective. But then two, we have to link the colonialism of Africa and other parts of the world with the Jim Crowism that is at the root of what we're doing right now in the United States. I've been blessed, I guess, over the years of having had the opportunity to engage within this struggle in different levels with different types of organizations. I've been from the middle of the road, you know, let's just all get along and let's vote group, which I think is absolutely important. But I've also served with the group that was going to take it to another level through more militant paramilitary action. So I get it on different fronts. But we all have to be plugged in somewhere. And we all don't have to agree at this particular moment in time in terms of who's doing what and who does what the best. But you have to plug in somewhere where you can actually make a substantial ongoing contribution towards this healing process. James Brown, one of the best American poets of the 20th century, said that, he had a song called Talking Loud, Ain't Saying Nothing. And I think Dr. Daniels pointed to it. We have a lot of folks within the Black Lives Matter movement and the movements that even became before that. We talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk. And we as leaders, we as activists, we have to hold people accountable, because a lot of folks are just talking it, and they're making every type of accommodation that they can that benefits themselves and in many ways sells out the larger vision of Black liberation and our own sense of personhood. Fannie Lou Hamer once said, there's one thing you have got to learn about our movement. 3 people are better than no people. We start where we are. We build, organization, we build substance, we build activity, we build where we are. So we don't have to wait for someone or some messiah to come forward in order for us to do something. When we talk about healing, again, a lot of times people like to speak very, very broadly. Myself, everyone who knows me knows I like to make it very personal. If you're an African man and you live in an apartment complex and there are 3 African boys in that building that don't have a father, that's where you can start as your revolution, becoming a mentor and guiding those boys. If we are educators and we work in the public school system and we know that that school system is shortchanging our students, our young people, then we have the responsibility to find a way to get into that struggle. We're an important piece in history right now. I mean, of course, COVID-19 has created a new sense of understanding. But it doesn't take that much to get back to an old sense of understanding. We seem to put a little too much confidence in the idea that the world is going to change. It's not. It's not going to change unless we're at the forefront of directing that change. So I would like to close by basically saying that we are in a period of great significance. We have a lot of young people out there who are on the line and actively trying to address these issues. But we also have to make sure that we give them the resources, the skills, and most of all, the understanding, so that we don't make this a one-pony show. We go out, we do some great things for 6 months, and then a year from now, we're right back where we started. So it's on us as folks who are a little older, who've had a little more experience, to allow this generation to express themselves and to do their thing, but at the same time, we have to give them the type of support and guidance and coaching that they need as we move this struggle and this liberation effort to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Adams. Thank you for your insight. Once again, if you have questions, any comments, please direct them to the chat, and we will be able to answer that during our questions and answer section. Right now, I would like to invite Crystal Onwu, our last speaker, last but not least. I'm excited to hear from her.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Sorry, I am not home at the moment. Sometime my best here. Again, thank you for ECHOS Africa for putting this presentation together. It's been, really amazing to see these conversations happening. I have, wanted them to happen for a very, very long time, and I'm so happy that ECHOS Africa has provided us with a platform to be able to have these conversations. My name is Crystal Onwu. I am the African Lead Advisor at the New York City Commission on Human Rights. This position is very important to me personally because it's a position that has not existed in New York City government. And so for a very long time, we have, felt the need that, to have a representation of the African diaspora within city government, because oftentimes policies and rules are put together but these policies and rules do not have contributions of people of African descent. And so, it was very important, for me, to essentially advocate for this position, just so that we can have, this information. Um, in doing this work, I do acknowledge that as an African woman from Cameroon, like growing up in the US, and as someone who was never really aware of what it meant to be Black until I came, to the United States of America. Because I know growing up in Cameroon, I was just a Cameroonian. I did not identify as being Black or being, whatever. I was just a human being, right, walking down the street. And so it wasn't until I came to the US where I had to check all these boxes. And it took some time, and I'm still struggling with that. Like why, like why do I have the need, to be able to check boxes? Like, why is that important? And so, even I remember, in high school, like having, to like go through all of these different changes, where most kids in my high school did not have an idea of where Cameroon was, even on the map, right? And that was in my history class. It took my teacher, to pull out the map, and she knew Cameroon because of soccer, right? She remembered Roger Mila, who was an amazing soccer player, and so she was able to educate the class on that. And then, even at then, it took me a very long time, to realize, the plight, that African Americans, the plight that, like Black people in general, have gone to here in the United States of America. And so, I remember being in grad school, at that point in time, I had, essentially permed my hair because I wanted to fit in so bad. And it wasn't until I went to grad school, then I realized that, wow, okay, so first of all, my name is very unique because my husband is Nigerian and Cameroonian. So I have a French name, and I have a, Cameroonian name and then a Nigerian name. And so oftentimes when people hear my name, they get confused. They have no idea, where I stand in society. So there's always this need, for you to, to belong or check a specific box. So I decided there in and there that I was going to stop perming my hair and go natural, right? And just, like wear, this natural hair because that was part of my identity, you know. And then, like when I started, acquainting myself, with the plight, of Black people in America in general, I started realizing that there's this, like, there's this contempt, towards Black people in general. And so it doesn't matter whether you're African American, Caribbean, like we are all, fighting the same fight, right? And so we have to find a way to be able to come together. We have to find, a way to be able to support each other, because if we don't do that, then all of us will not be able to advance. Um, and so, just having that understanding, has led me again to continue to push the work forward. Um, Last year was the 400-year commemoration, of the first recorded, slave ship that, essentially arrived in America. And so, it was the 1619 event. And so that commemoration, happen all over the world, right? And so it was a moment for us, again, to think about our roots, to think about where we're all coming from. And so, I remember Ghana putting together the Year of Return, right, to facilitate that conversation, right, between Black Americans as well as, Africans, because it's very important for us to have that conversation, because we are all part of the diaspora. Now, when we talk about, systematic racism, unfortunately, as the speakers have mentioned, it has happened from time immemorial. It has continued to happen even up to today. And so, I just wanted to go over some, important definitions, because oftentimes, at least at the Commission on Human Rights, we are a city agency that fights against discrimination, right? So discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodation, bias-based profiling by law enforcement, discriminatory harassment. And we have over 27 protected classes, right? And so, which essentially means that you can't face discrimination based on your race, based on your color, based on your national origin, right? And so the list goes on and on. and we have one of the most comprehensive anti-discrimination law in the entire nation, right? And again, this law doesn't matter if people have no idea that it exists. This law doesn't matter if people don't know that they can reach out, right, and file complaint, right? Yes, you can have laws in the books, but if the implementation, is not strong, then it just doesn't matter. So when we talk about racism, it's important for us to define what racism is. So racism is the use of power held by privileged groups to perpetrate oppression, exclusion, and discrimination based on race, right? Professor Adams mentioned something that was very, crucial, right? So he said, yes, oftentimes, we think about, the people who have been oppressed, but then we don't try to understand why is the oppression happening. Someone is benefiting from that oppression, right? And so when we start thinking about it that way, it gives us a different perspective, right? And racism, happens, across institutions. It happens, across different structures. So we have, laws, we have policies, we have practices, right? For example, institutionalized racism, we have slavery, right? We have segregation, we have redlining, we have, profiling by law enforcement, and then structural racism, right? We have, systematic factors that have been perpetuated over generations, right? Racial inequities, right? We have, mass incarceration of Black and Latino men. We have poverty. We have the lack of mobility, right, to the middle class. We have unemployment, right? So those are all forms of structural racism. And then, it's also important for us to think about, even the issue of colorism, right? Colorism, within different communities, right? Discrimination based, on someone's, lightness or darkness, of the skin color, right? And then also thinking about the issue of microaggression, right? Microaggressions, tend to be intentional or unintentional statements or behavior, right, that humiliate another person, right, and makes them feel like an outsider. And I think that this is, an issue that most people, especially most Black immigrants, go to, right? The assumption that, well, because you're Black, therefore you do not speak English well. Or if you know how to write, how did you possibly know how to write? Because you are from Africa, right? So therefore you are less intelligent, right? So there are all these different assumptions, or if you have natural hair, so maybe it's basically on camp, on camp, I mean, or if you have dreadlocks, so so we have all these different characteristics that make us so beautiful, as a race, as a people. But those same characteristics, oftentimes are being used against us, right? So just thinking about that. And when we look at New York City, right? New York City, where we're currently, residing in, and then we think about, the racism that happens in New York City, right? We think about, the fact that institutions, like City Hall, institutions, like downtown Manhattan, are built, on Lenape land, right? This were Native Americans' land, so they were, given away, and now we're profiting, from the land. We think about institutions, like Columbia University, and all of the many other educational institutions that continue to profit off, of slavery, right? And so it's important for us to think about, the history of slavery, the history of, systematic racism, and not just think about the South. We think about the North here in New York City, right? We think about, Seneca Village, right? And all of that. And then when we look into different, institutions, right? So we think about the healthcare system. We think about the criminal justice system. We think about education. We think about, even places of, unemployment, right? Where we constantly see an increase in the number of complaints that come in, right, as a result of race and color discrimination, where most of the time, Black people are not promoted within a certain institution because, of the skin color, right? It's as simple as that. We think about the children and family services, right? our you know our children of black and brown folks are treated differently, right? When it comes to the child welfare system. And so when we start thinking about all these different institutions, right, it is important for us to think about ways to which, right, we can continue to advocate, we can continue to come together, right, and find a way, you know, to be able to be that change that we would like to see. So it is through conversations like this that we're able, you know, to essentially start changing the narrative. And so in the past year or so, the Commission has dedicated a lot of resources in ensuring that, you know, the issues of Black and brown folks have been at the forefront. So for example, we did pass a legal guidance last year stating that individuals who wear natural hair should no longer feel afraid to go to work, right? Because hair is a part of you. If I'm going to an interview with my braid, I shouldn't have to worry about not getting that job. But that was the case, right, before this legal guidance was passed, right? I personally could not go to job interview with my natural hair. I had to go to a salon, you know, just to make sure it was down, right? You know, like that's how insane, you know, things were. But now we know that there's a legal guidance that protects every New Yorker, even if you have dreadlocks, because your hair has nothing to do with your qualification, right? And so it's important for us to acknowledge that. And so New York City was able to lay that foundation. And so many other states, you know, have done, you know, similar work. So we saw California, we saw, you know, New Jersey, as well as New York State that essentially passed the Crown Act, right? We also think about, you know, issues of systematic racism when it comes to housing, right? Which is, you know, a big issue, right? There's a lot of, you know, racism that happens, you know, in housing. We think about gentrification, you know, happening across our different, you know, neighborhoods throughout the city of New York, right? And how do we continue to fight for those, right? And so, you know, I just want, you know, everyone to have, you know, an understanding that in order for us, you know, to be able to continue to fight these systems, it is so important for us to have conversations like this. It is so important for us to continue to come together, to think about our next steps, you know, and not work in silos, because until all of us, you know, are free, none of us is free, right? You know, and I also thought it was very important, you know, I think one of the speakers mentioned something about, you know, like, why should we say Black Lives Matter? It's so, I think that statement is so powerful because I never thought about that. You know, like, why should our lives just matter, right? You know, like are we reducing the standards, you know, so low for our own lives, you know, like, so I think that's just something that we should all, you know, continue to think about. You know, and I do hope, you know, that in the future, you know, we will be able to build a better life, you know, and leave a better world for our children, as we continue, you know, to fight all these systems. And so we do, you know, a lot of presentations toward the city of New York, you know, and so we oftentimes tell New Yorkers, if you have a complaint of discrimination, you can always call 311 and say human rights, right? Even though we're all telecommuting, we're still taking complaints of discrimination. So again, you know, thank you so much for having me, and I'll be here to take any questions. And sorry for the background noise and everything that was happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for the great insight from our powerful speakers. We really appreciate your time. We were going to go straight into the Q&A, but we deemed it fit to give room to Mr. Terence Johnson because his comment has been addressing several angles, or an angle that a lot of us do not take as important as it should. So, Mr. Terence Johnson, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
I don't think I don't talk that long. I just text.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Everything I wanted to say
Mhm.
is thank you for allowing me this opportunity, by the way. But everything is in the chat. I just don't know. There's no way we can move forward or in the future have these kind of conversations without deeply talking about and including technologies. And to respond to Fumi, I'm speaking specifically of the emerging technologies, data, artificial intelligence, and so forth, that affects all areas of our lives. We're going into a war situation with with a hoe or with a stick or with rocks. You know, we must get away from this, and we must improve and challenge our thinking, even in our older ages. It's a matter of survival that we keep up and that we talk with our children and we keep a connection and we learn the new tools and the technology. It is so imperative and important, I believe and think, to our survival. So if we have these conversations, let's say, for instance, with the youth about technology, they will even learn from us because they are learning our interest. We are establishing relationships with them. We are preventing this divide. We have to connect. We have to keep up. Otherwise, we're talking about old conversations, tactics and ways, in new days. Surely, I would be the last person to say that history is not important. It is the foundation. But we need more than just history. We need food. We need technology. We need relationships. We need our youth. So there's so many things that we need. We have to look at this from broader perspectives and just keep up. I don't know what else I left out that might be in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Terrence. Does any of the panelists want to respond to that?
I think myself and the lecturer most specifically, we make the issue of technology, I think, center stage at a lot of the work that we do. I don't go deep into my background or resume, but I know that a lecturer through her program has been using various forms of media and technology to do filmmaking with cell phones, to use all different types of technology and introducing it specifically to young people, preteens and teenagers. One of my areas at the university is I have a number of science and technology programs where we're doing everything from geospatial technology with 11 and 12-year-olds to artificial intelligence, to coding for video game design, coding for drone piloting. We have a drone piloting academy. We also now have a 3D printing program and various other forms of media technology. So I definitely agree with Mr. Johnson, but that we're doing these things, as I said earlier in my presentation, it's not about talking the talk, it's walking the walk. And I've had the Drone Academy for almost 10 years, and we've produced quite a few young drone pilots as well as coders. So I definitely agree with what he's saying, but a lot of that work is being done. We need to do a lot more of it too.
Thank you so much for that. So we have a question from the audience to Ms. Weston. The question says, you referenced the recent Central Park episode about the white lady weaponizing her race and the black guy in Chicago who was killed in his own home. What would you suggest the Central Park bird watcher or the brother of the black guy in Chicago do in these cases?
Thank you for the question. So I have to respond in saying I don't think there's one answer. I don't want to say my idea is the right idea. I think my only point in mentioning those two examples were that we're too quick to pardon something that is detrimental to our existence. I know, and I talk about spirituality, and I understand about turning the cheek and pardoning your brother, keeping your enemy close, all these ideas, but it's not progressing for us. We're not moving forward. I think if I had to choose something, I think he should testify. I think they have law now that because him testifying, no matter what the outcome is, for example, birdwatcher, is going to be helpful for future incidents. There are there's millions and millions of incidents of people falsely accusing people of color just because they know they have the power to do so. And that people would be quicker to believe the woman with her dog than the black man who just was bird watching. People would not believe it. Historically, we know it. So him testifying sets a precedent. We need to set a new precedent that you cannot just attack us. You can't just attack us and people go, oh yeah, it's another attack. We've been talking about this every time we look at the news and we see another person. We're not even shocked by it anymore. We can name all the names here. We have posters and posters of all these beautiful Black people assassinated in their own country under weird circumstances, even those who are not initially from this country, just integrating into this space. So we have to set a limit, and a limit begins with saying, no, this is not right. The same way they set limits for us. I work with the young people in the detention centers. They've done minimal things, very little, and they are doing time for it, and serious time, because somebody made a decision, okay, we caught you, and now you're gonna do some time. So why are we so quick to say, we caught you, lady in the park, but you already suffered because you lost your job? So that's one for her. For the man in the courtroom, I think it sets once again, it sets a bad example. I think, I feel as though once again, we have to say some things you just cannot, you want to forgive, but publicly hugging a woman who assassinated your brother just because she cries in a courtroom, once again, I feel like we need a stronger hand. And that doesn't mean we're trying to put all these people in prisons. We just want them to recognize you cannot treat us like this because there will be repercussions.
Thank you, Electra. Thank you so much. Now, there's a question from Terence to Dr. Daniels. He says that it's very good when Africans everywhere can come together around social justice and human rights. We must address abuses and violations to us by people who look like us. How do we address abuses and violations to us by people who look like us, Dr. Daniels?
Well, I think that's obviously an incredibly important issue, and it's one that pains us terribly, that we're in a situation where one of the things that besets us most, and I think has us grieving most, is the fact that in any one given weekend, like the weekend we just saw, whether it's Chicago, whether it's here, I mean, the random senseless killings that are taking place. Well, first and foremost, I think we have to, and this does not answer it, but we do have to understand the root causes. And that is we have internalized a sense of our own oppression. Because if we don't believe we are something, we will treat each other as if we're nothing, right? Mm-hmm. And so the anecdote to some degree is that that's why Carter G. Woodson was absolutely correct. But we can OD on drugs, but we cannot OD on African history and culture. It is a constant necessity because we're dealing with a culture that is always attacking us. The language attacks us. Everything Black is evil and ugly, and all of the things that you all know in terms of the language we speak. And so it begins there with us at all levels. And this is not a sentimental thing. It is really building up a sense of who we are as a people and operating from an ethic of ma'at. That is to say, an ethic of treating ourselves and others with righteousness and justice. It also means public policy. I mean, we have to be, this is why when you look at the defund police effort, which is a little troubling to some people because people get a little nervous when you say defund. But in reality, when you really look at what's being said, and even Electra, a lot of those young people who are in jail shouldn't be there for those little petty crimes either. You know what I mean? Well, why are we doing this? And so we need resources. I've said, and it doesn't take rocket science, but it does show you the way in which Black lives don't matter. Good jobs, not even a good job, a piece of job with wages is one of the, would satisfy a lot of these young brothers and sisters. There was a situation, and I'll finish, in Washington, D.C., we worked with some folks, and they were dealing around this issue of police shootings and so forth. And one of the young brothers had just got up and said, plainly, said, we'll trade our guns for jobs. So it's more than that. It's more than that. I don't want to simplify it, but that's a part of it. But when you exchange the gun for a job, we must also rehabilitate the person. We must rehabilitate. We must find ourselves again, because we have been traumatized. We have been de-Africanized. We have been turned into, in some instances, monsters who will take each other out and not even think about it. And that's scary. Random, senseless killing. But I think those are some of the things that we have to focus on. We have to continue to call it out. We have to continue to work on these issues. But I absolutely agree. That is one of the things that pains us most, is how we are destroying each other.
Thank you for that, Doctor. The next question is for Crystal Onwu. And it says, it's great that these laws are in the books, but most of the time when you go for interviews and you're discriminated against, you never know. They are very subtle. In other words, how do you address these subtle forms of racism? If you wear locks or dreads and the interviewer does not like them and doesn't hire you because of them, you are not told that is the reason why you are not hired. So how do you deal with these forms of racism?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I do before I answer it, I do have an example that I would like to share. I remember, when I was first pregnant, I remember working at an organization, and I went for the interview because I was so tiny and so small. They had no idea that I was pregnant. And it wasn't until I started working, and I was halfway through my pregnancy when I asked for a leave, and then they remember the CEO saying, "Oh, I had no idea that you were pregnant." And so once she mentioned that, it went down the hill for me, right? Because then she started making my life a living hell, and so it was very difficult. At that point in time, I had no idea that this was discrimination. And it took me a couple of years, it actually took me working for the Commissioner of Human Rights to understand that I had, rights. And so I could have been able to sue. We do have a 1-year statute of limitation for you to file a claim of discrimination. And once that 1 year has, overlapped, you can actually go to New York State Court to file a claim of discrimination. And so for this, individuals asking the question, first of all, thank you so much for this question, because I know that a lot of people have similar questions. At the commission, we do have testers, and so oftentimes, if you're not sure that you're being a victim of discrimination, you should still reach out to us, right? Because oftentimes we can send in testers to go into that institution, right? To basically apply for that same job, right? That you didn't get, and if that person who might be of a different color gets it, then the presumption, the assumption is that there might be a case of discrimination. And so it is very important, for you to be aware of your surroundings. It is very important for you to be aware, of your interactions with people, because again, just like microaggressions, oftentimes, these things are so subtle, like they happen to you without even realizing that they're happening to you. And so you have to be, fully aware and fully conscious, of your environment. But again, the good thing is that the commission, we have testers. And so if you reach out, you say, well, I think that I might have been a victim of discrimination. This is what happened. We can send in testers, to go to this specific location, just to make sure that, an act of discrimination occurred. So that would be my answer.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Dr. Daniels, you have a question from Nigeria. One of our participants, Emmanuel David, is asking, he says there's a situation in Africa where the constitution is formulated to show bias against its own citizens and favor the white. How do we tackle such or initiate a change process? For instance, the Nigerian labor law, in the process of recruitment of foreign nationals, tend to favor foreigners more than the whites, than the citizens. A white person is most likely to get a job in Nigeria than a Nigerian citizen. How do we initiate this change? Dr.
Well,
Daniel.
well, well. First of all, let me just say that I'm a proud Nigerian. By the way, I took my test, and I got my DNA. So I don't know whether I should say it. I don't want to be discriminated against by any ethnic group, but I'd be Nigerian. I'm going to do, and I also want to say a little bit about the last question as well. I mean, I think that this is what I talked about when I mentioned the whole question of internalized oppression. It applies also across the board, right? And I think this what's happening is there's a generation all across the continent, whether it's the Friends of the Congo, whether it's Africa Rising, there is a rising tide, both in the diaspora and the continent, who are simply challenging these things. They must be challenged. I mean, how is it that there is and I, years and years ago, when I first went to Africa, I noticed that on the continent, there was still this deference for white people, for Europeans, because, by the way, if you receive a European education, there's a tendency to be deferential to those who have educated you. I think somebody else said earlier, somebody went to German and they're now German. Well, that's what Carter G. Woodson talked about. He said, he or she who controls minds has nothing to fear from bodies. Rudyard Kipling talked about that in terms of Indians. The whole notion was we will just make the Indians British and we can just leave them alone. They will act like good British people. If you look at Gandhi to begin with, Gandhi was all British stuff and this and that, and but it was interesting how Gandhi moved, because when Gandhi started his revolution, he started it at the cultural level. He took off that stuff. He went back to the native guard. He went to the spinning wheel, all of those things, which were both economic and political. So the short answer is that it's wrong. It's wrong. And let's take Brother Davis's notion. It does not. The journey towards the revolution begins with a handful, 2 or 3 people who are getting others to say that this is not right, and having the courage to challenge and challenge and challenge. So then finally, on the last question, I just want to say on the hair and this and so forth and so on, please be aware that there should be, first of all, we should be challenging. Every department ought to be having cultural diversity training, and that ought to be a part of the training, number one. But believe me, right here in this city, a brother named Ilambe Brath initiated a Black is Beautiful movement that reverberated all across this country. The idea 30 or 40 years ago that you'd have athletes or anybody on television with dreads or having was unheard of. So I'm saying there's a victory. So what we're doing now is we're putting the final touches on that victory, because we have achieved the right for our women and men to, if they want to, do our straighten their hair, they can. You have the freedom now to be natural or to do whatever you want to do. It's not finished, but that's a struggle that we certainly waged, very successfully in terms of the Black Power, Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist movement of the 60s and the 70s.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I have a question myself. As someone who works in school, so I work in a high school, I've worked there for 7 years, and I know just listening to Ms. Watson and Mr. Adams speak, I know you guys have a lot of experience working with young people. So my question is directed at working with young people. My question is, like, how do we make sure that, and now you've challenged me, Ms. Electra, so thank you for that. I don't want to say the Black Lives Movement, because I'm also thinking to myself, like, I shouldn't just matter. I shouldn't just want to matter. So I'm not going to use that phrase right now. But how do we make this period in time last? How do we make sure that it's not just a trend? How do we make sure that it's not just a passing phase? How do we get young adults high school, college students to continue to perpetuate what is happening now. Because what I find in working in schools is that their attention span is really short. So like when something happens, it's like, hoorah, let's do this. And then after a while, it's like, okay, what's the next big thing? What's the next thing we're doing? So how do we make sure that this lasts, especially for young adults? Because I do believe we're the ones that are going to make this movement go. And then specifically to Ms. Watson, you talked about like the messages we're sending, and you sort of like challenge the different messages we're sending. And I want to hear from you, like, what messages should we be sending to our young people, to our children, to school kids? What messages do you think we should be sending to them?
I think, well, it's so, on so many levels. First, I want to say everything I do has youth involved. So I know there is a beauty about the elder passing the baton. But as someone wrote in the messages as well, we learn so much from the youth as well. It's an exchange. So I am constantly empowered by young people. To keep them engaged, I always have other youth around me. I surround myself with youth, not just because, okay, there's youth, so bring youth, but they see things that I don't see, and I see things from a different way that they don't see. That's how we empower each other. And someone mentioned also in the quotes about keeping, and also as you're saying, focus. There's a program, Neon, throughout every borough. It's called the Neon Art. I said the Neon Arts, but there's Neon Sports. It's the Neighborhood Opportunity Network. And sadly, I want to say it is somewhat sad. The funding comes from the Department of Probation, but it's not only for kids with probation. So it's a lot of different programs. I'm one of many, and I could give people a list of the different organizations so that children, young people, and even that, when I say young people, it's all the way up to 29, 30 years old, to be involved with like-minded people and like-minded programming, whether it's from sports to STEM to poetry and music or filmmaking. It is so broad. They decided, the city of New York specifically realized that we so need to empower our young people because they are getting lost, and we can't incarcerate everyone on the street for these random, ridiculous things. How do we keep them focused? The doctor said something so powerful. We also have to mention in this conversation about mental illness. You know, we are mentally struggling. And, you know, there's a joke which is a sad response, but there's a joke that goes, what is mental health? What is a mental health solution for people of color? And at least in the Black and American community, it's been, you better get yourself together. Get yourself together. Just by someone saying, get yourself together, is supposed to make you change your dynamic. The idea that there has to be therapy, all forms of therapy to deal with the traumas that we've been through, it's just unimaginable. We're not addressing that. And so when they're saying, why aren't you getting it together? Or why aren't these children focused? Or how can we get them engaged? They are dealing with daily traumas. And I'm not gonna go so far. I'm gonna get to the end of your question and pass it to Mr. Adams, that a young man in a detention center, his trauma is he cannot do better in his life because his father won't let him go say, for example, to see his grandmother, where he can get out of New York in madness. Why? Because the father won't have a place to stay. They're in a family shelter. And to be able to have a place to stay, this young man can't advance in his own life because his father depends on him. If not, he doesn't have a shelter to stay in. Now, I think about my daily drama. Imagine if I had to deal with where am I going to live, and my own parent, who also robs from me, needs me to stay there because of different things like that. And the last thing I want to say, what you said about what should we do differently. I gave examples. If I'm the Chinese person and this is my child, I would say, my name is Electra Weston. People wanted to call me Tra, Elect, I make people call me by my name. So African people make people call you by their name. If they have to sit down and write it out phonetically, they need to speak your name. That shows you and your children that where you come from counts and matters. Empower African languages. When you go to a school and you come from another country, and this is not just Africa, but I'm using example of Africa because I deal with so many of them. We have a language interpreter helpline because there's a huge community of African language speakers who haven't done so many advanced education. They haven't had advanced education, so they are speaking the languages of their communities, and they're not understanding what's going on. And then they try to adapt in the colonials. So I'm saying, when I'm the little boy from Burkina Faso in a classroom, African people need to insist that you bring someone that speaks that language to communicate with that child. Spanish people have been able to do it. The Spanish speaking communicate. Even Haitian people have been able to enforce that. When we go to school fairs, there is a representative to interpret for Haitian Creole, which even in the language books is not even considered a language. It's considered a dialect, which is terrible. I consider it a language. So why aren't people who speak Lari, Bambara, Hausa, why are they not? They spend money in this country. They spend an enormous amount of money in this country and demand that they bring your language when you need to speak about health problems. Children need that. That is the example that we set. And Jean also talked, and the last thing, the little young man whose parents said, I'm gonna give you a better life, I'm gonna send you to Germany. Now you change this child into a German child. He becomes a German child, and I know you want a better life, but being, in my opinion, in the bosom of your family is a lot more powerful than sending your child off to some stranger who may give them some kind of education and lack of self-love that you're never gonna be able to reverse. So these are the ways, simple things. I'm saying simple by making a decision. I'm not gonna, if I'm from Mexico and it's horrible and it's drama, cartel and all the stereotypes, there's gotta be more beauty that I can give to my child than letting my child randomly float on the border because I'm not really sure if I can give a better life. I seriously believe we have to take these things in consideration. Jean?
Yeah, I combine everything, you know. I didn't speak earlier about technology simply because that wasn't the flow, but the programs that I have designed connect art, technology, science to living. You know, history is alive. So what we can do with young people in schools is turn those cell phones and turn that technology that they have into tools for learning. You know, connect them to their community. You know, anything as simple as take your cell phone and go out and interview somebody in the community about how long they lived in the Bronx, how long did they lived in Harlem, what village did they come from in the Dominican Republic or in Mali. There are ways that you can use what's available to young people that they're familiar with to greatly empower them. I started taking young people to Africa in 1990. I've started with middle school students. I've taken middle school, high school, college, young people to Africa to work on projects. But there are projects you can do right here in the city. We don't have to get on the plane to make learning very much available, specifically with the technologies. I work also with Mrs. Kadiatu Diallo and the Amadou Diallo Foundation with young people. Every year we have the Amadou Diallo Youth Commemoration, where we bring hundreds of young people together to talk about Amadou Diallo. And of course, we deal with his tragedy, but we also deal with his promise. You know, Amadou Diallo spoke 5 languages. He had a computer education. He had saved up $10,000 for his own educational improvement here within the City University of New York. We use those types of tools and the technologies. We've done Amadou Diallo programs using hip hop. We've done an Amadou Diallo program using comic books and graphic novels. We've done an Amadou Diallo program using computer technologies, because there are just props to get young people to engage. And lastly, we've even done science projects where we use the technology and we use a social justice theme. We connect art, we connect history, we connect science, we connect society right now, so that young people can be engaged about what's happening, you know. And I just think that young people have a tremendous power in their pockets or their pocketbooks, known as their cell phones. It's a tremendous computer. It's on us as adults to coach them and to show them how that tool can be used to empower themselves and also to learn about, you know, what's happening in their communities and to make some sense of contribution. Now, before I close, I think that's the last piece. We have to want to make young people, help them become mindful so that they can see their connectedness to us so that they want to make a contribution. If we just fill their heads up with garble, they won't be able to make that type of decision. But if we give them something real, young people will respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. We have just 8 minutes to go. So I'm going to let Dr. Daniels, I'm going to combine two questions for Dr. Daniels to respond to. But just before I do that, I just want to acknowledge everybody who is in attendance here, and particularly mention my pastor, Pastor Henrietta Osage. Thank you so much. She logged on immediately we opened the platform. Pastor Charles Folami and Dr. Latunde Olushesi, thank you so much for being part of this forum. We appreciate. Now, Dr. Daniels, there's a question here. It leads off from what Terence had mentioned earlier about unity amongst Blacks. Another person is asking, why is there so much hostility, rivalry between the African Americans and Africans and Africans from Africa, from the Caribbean? Why is there so much hostility between them?
Well, you know, a part of this is is intentional. I mean, I can remember first of all, let me just say something. It is much better than it used to be, far better than it used to be. When I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, if people came from Africa to this country, there were Europeans who steered them away from the African American community. They'd be out there somewhere, we'd be here somewhere. And we would feed these myths were being circulated. African Americans don't like Africans, the African don't like African Americans. Well, early on, the reality is that we all went through, at least in this country, a kind of jungle gym Tarzan experience. If I would be truthful about it, I mean, who wanted to be African if, you know, we were getting images of people being boiled in pots and umgala and bones in their nose and all this idiocy that was out there. And so we had to go through a kind of experience. And, you know, we've had a really brutal time here in terms of our identity, because it was like beaten out of us in many respects. And that's a long story. But on the other side, it seems to me there was a sense too that, well, you know, we've achieved independence, and what's wrong with these Africans over here? What's wrong with these Black people? How come they haven't done more? And there was a comment made earlier, I think it was by our sister on the Human Rights Commission, forgive me for not remembering her name, because she talked about the way in which she learned about the struggle of Africans in this country, the Black freedom struggle. And it seems to me that what we try to do with the Pan-African Unity Dialogue, you know, which Ife is a part of, is to address these issues of potential tension between our communities, because as someone else said earlier, and I think was again our speaker from the Human Rights Commission, at the end of the day, you know, those who killed Amadou Diallo weren't interested in their ethnicity or the particularity of where they came from, or Abner Louima. You know what I mean? So Malcolm said the same thing. He said, we all catch hell for the same reason. We catch hell because of the pigmentation of because we're Black people. So how do you then turn that into an affirmative? Well, a part of the way you do it, you turn it into an affirmative, is by having these kinds of conversations. I think that, again, Jean mentioned that earlier. We need these kinds of conversations so that we are able to look at each other's particularities of culture and ethnicity, but understand that our struggle is a Pan-African struggle. I mean, Du Bois and Blyden and Nkrumah. I mean, there are so many people who have exhorted us to come together as a single people. And so we have to practice that. It's about practice. And we're a lot better today. I mean, there was a time when we were not calling ourselves African American. We were Negroes, we were colored, we were anything else but. Now, Malcolm X was way ahead of his time. Even in those days, Malcolm had said Afro, Because in part, the question is, well, what is Black land? You know, I mean, we may not be able to determine with specificity what our particular origins are, though we're finding that out. But the one thing we know is that if there's Italians, there's Italy. If there's Germany, there's Germany. I mean, so where's Black land? I mean, Queen Mother Moore, who was my mentor, asked me that question. You know, where's Negro land? Where's Black land? And so at least we came to understand that we are African. We are African. That's why I read that place. We are an African people. And we need to understand that irrespective to the particularities of our ethnicity and wherever we are, we have a Pan-African obligation to work with each other to create a basis of global righteous global Black power. And I say those words deliberately. We're not going to exploit anybody. Exploitation is not in our DNA in terms of our lineage. We're going all the way back to ancient Kemet and the notions of ma'at, righteousness and justice. But we must assert ourselves in terms of our resources, what we have at our disposal, and work together to lift each other out of the morass of systematic and structural racism that was imposed on us, and to reclaim our rightful place in the forefront of human civilization.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Ron Daniels, Electra Weston, Jane Adams, Christel Ong. And thank you to our participants. We have lots other questions coming in. Unfortunately, we did say it's 3 to 5, and I know a lot of people have engagements today, but this is just the beginning of the very many conversations we'll be having, both organized by ECHOS Africa Initiatives, by Pan-African Unity Dialogue, everybody. We just need, like Felicia asked earlier on, we just hope that this is not a flash in the pan. We have to make effort to ensure it's not a flash in the pan. For change to occur, it has to be consistent. We have to be, even when everything dies down, when things are being done now to pacify us, whether we do paint anywhere, Black Lives Matter or whatever, we need to keep our eyes on the prize, keep our eyes on our goal, is to make change happen. So this is just the first of many conversations we'll be having, and we'll be involved in the conversation of other people. That's what we talked about, the unity. It doesn't have to be one organized by you. We all need to be part of the conversation, be part of the movement. That's the only way change can happen. Once again, I want to say thank you. Thank you to the board of ECHOS Africa Initiative. Thank you to our great speakers, all the participants. It's been a great outing, and just this is going to be featured in the magazine and on our TV show, both here in the US and Nigeria. So thank you so much for this, and I have learned a lot today. I hope everybody who participated equally learned a lot. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.